are Smart City Navigators, a podcast about innovation, sustainability, and new technologies on the market.
This podcast is brought to you by NaviParking. Bartosz Czerwinski, engineering leader with 15 plus years of industry experience, passionate about paving the path for high-performing teams following continuous delivery at speed. Pragmatist and ever-learning software craftsman who firmly believes technology is just a tool. What really matters is the right mindset and perseverance. Former CTO at NaviParking, responsible for product engineering team expansion at an international scale and leading continuous agile evolution toward product revolution, a scalable parking platform of platforms. Co-founder at Shaped Thoughts, a boutique software house that ships great software. Let's welcome Bartosz Czerwinski in today's episode of Smart City Navigators podcast. Hello Bartosz.
Hey Michał.
How are you today? And welcome in Warsaw.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm very fine, thank you. And I'm glad to be here today to share some thoughts and insights about cool topics, I guess.
Bartosz, we're going to talk about two subjects. The first topic for today's episode will be security, which is a very, let's say, intense topic in a modern world, because security is something that many people is trying to be cautious about this topic. And you are a specialist about not only about the security stuff, but mainly about the security, software security and data security as well. So the first question is, what is happening with the security in general? What is security of people's data?
It's a pretty broad topic, as you mentioned, that touches many aspects of our lives since these days we live with devices which are next to us all the time and are pretty much insecure, I would say, since there are a lot of threats that hide behind the corner and many users, many, you can call them hackers and users that are willing to use certain areas of technology to steal our data, to cheat us, or basically make sure that we kind of, jump into those insecure areas of today's world.
This area is not only about, let's say, hackers hacking your bank account, right? It's even broader than that.
Absolutely, yes. So security, when we talk about, I would say, life, right? Today we sit in a room. And we can say that the owner of the property put efforts into securing this room, so only you as the tenant can access it, right? So it's a physical security. So not everyone can access the building, since not everyone is allowed to use the facility. So security in this aspect makes sure that we can essentially give access to only limited people to a resource. We have also resources in computer systems, like digital resources. Your phone is a digital resource where only certain people, I guess you or maybe your wife, can access it. And basically, we have to talk, when thinking security, about anything where data is kept, anything anyone can access to, and basically anything that is a kind of device that is producing some output, right? And those things have to be basically secured from multiple perspectives. And moving towards data security and security of systems, of course, here we talk about cyber security threats that we have to be aware of to ensure that whatever we protect, whether it's a user data, whether it's a computer system or a device, we do have put measures that allow us to ensure high standards of security. And if we look at companies like Google or Facebook, they live and survive thanks to our data, and that data lets them essentially earn money, right? Because they do, to some extent, sell the data by, for instance, sharing your or my interests with other companies, and based on that, they can offer us some targeted advertisements. So security of data is something pretty complex in modern world, because as you mentioned, data is spread around, ritually spread around. And what we should kind of look at first is that in the past, even like these days, there are such systems, but essentially in, let's say, less modern systems, data was usually kept somewhere. However, this place was like a server or a property that was owned by the company that provided some services, right? Also, looking maybe further into past, if you were like a user of some software, that software was keeping data on your machine, right? And that was pretty normal, that when you install something, I don't know, a CRM software, basically the data will be kept on your machine, sometimes on a shared database, but it was kind of pretty much straightforward where the data was kept. These days, when we talk about cloud and storing data in the cloud and different services like, cloud drives, I don't want to put any specific brands here. However, there are many companies that offer this type of services. The data is somewhere. You don't know whether it's, within, like stored within a certain container in a data center in Europe, or maybe in the US, maybe Middle East. Basically, data is somewhere. Of course, if you look into the details of privacy policies that companies do offer, you can try to navigate towards certain points in that policies that do tell you how they process the data, where it's being kept. However, many companies that do offer services worldwide, they will use infrastructure around the world. So data centers will be spread around the world, and that means that you don't know where the data is. And honestly, as a technology person, I can tell and somehow justify those companies that it's pretty super difficult to tell exactly where your data is, since systems are designed in a way that they are scalable and they have to kind of adapt to new environment. And basically the data is like the physical location of the data is not kind of tagged. It is of course possible to be more precise. However, being more precise means it's more complex, more costly to build, and it's not that relevant, right? Why? Because again, moving forward, when we talk about data security, those companies have to kind of abide by certain regulations depending on in which country they do operate. And if the regulation is not that strict, then why would they invest into making sure that a user like you or me can exactly know where they have my bits of data stored? So it's like, again, a very wide topic. However, what's important here these days is that when we use any kind of service, even services provided by producers of mobile devices, we know that there are like quite a few, just a few biggest companies, but basically whatever you do on your computer, on your phone, or whatever, there are at least a few or like a number of apps which will store the data in the cloud, and you know that potentially unwanted people can get access to it. And what we have to be aware that whatever we store, whatever we put in terms of data on our devices, it will be somewhere. So always think, do I want my data to travel that far? And that's a question that is hard to answer usually, because well, I do want to use the service, but at the same time I want to have my data safe. So of course, talking about a wide spectrum of applications that we use for like day to day, right? For many things, we like them, we love them. However, we always have to be aware and cautious that maybe the app I use and maybe the system I do connect to is not protected good enough. So whatever data I put there, it's a risk, right?
Yes, because if we think about data security, we usually know, like from mainstream media or from social media, we know only news about the big tech companies. They are trying to protect their data and they are very well in securing their data. But what about small companies? Let's say, for instance, for example, our company like NaviParking. How we trying to secure those data?
When it comes to NaviParking, we do use cloud platforms. Specifically, I can name it. It's like AWS, and so we've been using different providers. However, we found that with AWS, we can essentially provide best security of our services. And of course, when it comes to data specifically, we do use industry standard mechanisms of protection, like encryption, data sharding, and basically many things which allow us to make sure that no one who would get, let's say, a simple access to a data set would be able to read that data set right away, right? So that's one thing. And secondly, we kind of ensure, because the question about data security is not only whether the database, for instance, where the data is kept, is just secure. It's also about what's the journey of the data. So we have to look at that thing end to end and ensure that from this little field in your app where you put your email address or phone number to the through the wire, through basically the network, the internet, and so on, data travels securely and then effectively is being stored in a place that is safe. So there are many aspects to look into and take care of, and essentially first of all, we ensure high security standards in terms of encryption. We use secure protocols. We make sure that our apps are using proper mechanisms to transfer the data to the destination the right way. And also, of course, in the middle, when we talk about the services which are kind of hidden behind the scene, because of course, if you, for instance, use our NaviPay app or NaviParking or NaviParking Enterprise, whatever, that's just the endpoint, right? So this is an app for the end user, but then to make it work, we also need to have a number of services which are running somewhere in the cloud. And basically, the data has to travel through many wires, many places, and making sure that whenever on that way the data is processed anywhere, we basically make sure that it's being done the right way according to industry standards. So that is kind of the first thing. The second thing is that even though we do implement best in class mechanisms to ensure security of data, we also have to make sure that we do evaluate ourselves, and also for instance do audits, like security audits, to basically measure whether, and actually challenge the mechanisms we use to check whether they are secure enough, right? Because security is a continuous thing. It's not something that can just stop with saying that, okay, I have implemented that security protocol and it works. No, you need to make sure that it's being constantly evaluated and check over and over again whether actually it works, right? So this is an ongoing process. And apart from the fact that we, again, do our best to use mechanisms that are best in class, as I mentioned, we also do have a set of processes to test throughout the development of our products whether security is kind of combined into the process. But also we rely on external experts to check whether what we do is actually makes sense and is secure.
How do you and engineers from our company, or even from other companies, how they test that the security is done, well, right? Is there any like a test or something to, or maybe you hire a hacker who are trying to hack our application, and then we pay them for, looking for let's say a loopholes or something like that?
It's a daily work in a sense that any feature we build and implement, there's always a question: is it secure, right? But the question about security is not only about the data itself. It's about a multitude of things that could happen to the app or to the data that is traveling, and that we need to consider to basically answer the question whether it is secure. So, for instance, right, when engineers build a new feature that would allow user to input some extra information into the application, they of course have to ensure that some basic mechanisms which allow us to check whether the data that user inputs into the app is actually legitimate, right? Because there are different types of attacks, and some attacks are called, there's like a group of attacks called injection attacks, where basically a user can inject malicious code or some malicious content into the application and basically crash it. However, if the data is not properly kind of processed, and this malicious data would be somehow transferred to our data center, it can also do a harm there. So you can imagine that by doing some pretty simple tricks, if data, or actually the application in terms of how it's handling the data, it would not consider certain basic kind of steps that have to happen when processing a single chunk of data, then a user that is not even skilled very much, he could, for instance, perform a SQL injection type of attack that would allow that user to get access to data of our users, or even any kind of data we do store in a database, right? So basically, first of all, make sure that we do implement standards that we have defined. Secondly, test it out, right? So security is something that has to be kind of baked into the product by default. So for instance, there are tools that allow to perform security automated testing. So you can essentially evaluate the code that engineers write against certain security checks. And this is a very powerful tool because it allows you to execute a number of rules over all code lines you have written, or you have in your repository that keeps the application code, and basically check it over and over again. So what's powerful here is that it's repeatable, and secondly, you can have a number of rules. You can even define new rules that would basically check new threats, for instance, that have just appeared on the market, and basically make sure that we do check it continuously in the process to be kind of certain that there are no either defects that have been introduced, right, but also regression. And regression means here that we haven't kind of get back to a position where some old threat that was discovered a number of days ago would have been reappear again because someone made a mistake. So awareness, and of course also using certain mechanisms and practices, is something that a developer has to be aware of.
Okay, so we have different types of attacks, right? Are there any common attacks? Are there any basic examples, or are there any specific types of attacks?
There are many type of attacks which are let's say easy to try, and that's why they are common, because if it's easy, you can just try it out anywhere or on any user, depending on what's the target. Because in security systems, there is always a kind of a target towards which you want to execute a certain type of attack. And I mentioned briefly before about the SQL injection that can be used on the application, for instance. However, that would not be an attack that you would, let's say, target towards a user, right? So moving on, we have to talk about various aspects of security threats which are being targeted, towards the platform, for instance, right? We mentioned before also about the denial of service, DOS, and there are also attacks which are towards users, as mentioned before, where basically, for instance, someone wants to trick you And here we can talk about phishing, for instance, or ransomware, and like tools which are basically used, or techniques, just simple techniques via email that are used to get the information someone wants to get from you.
And there's one very popular right now, like you get a text message and there's a link that you have some receipt, and you didn't pay some receipt, and you have to just click on the link, and then it's going to transfer, let's say, a very small amount of money from your bank account to those hackers, let's say.
Exactly. And this type of attack is actually phishing, where basically someone wants to trick you in a way that you feel, okay, actually I did order some package, for instance, right? So why don't I click there and actually pay that small amount of money so I can get what I want to get? And maybe they just made a mistake and they want me to get some extra fee that I was supposed to pay before. So basically, yes, here we move towards a term called social engineering, which I guess we also want to explore a bit today. However, the fact is that attacks which are targeted towards not the systems but humans are basically most dangerous, because in every security system, if we talk about, again, security overall, the weakest link is a human being, right? And why human beings are essentially biggest security risk? Because they are unpredictable. Right? If you talk about a system that performs, certain type of activity, provides some features, or just does some kind of work, you can to some extent predict what happens there, and then build mechanisms that will protect the system, against unwanted access. Right? But with human beings, you cannot predict anything, so that's why it's so difficult to ensure security when it comes to things that happen to us in today's world, like messages you receive, like text or email, or any channel, or even like, I guess, attacks where on a social media portal you receive a message from your friend that is asking you for a favor. Hey, I need some money because I'm lost, right? Yes. And of course, it does not happen without a reason, because in most of those cases, it's basically hackers trying to get access to your account, for instance, or basically even get a small amount of money by giving you some kind of using some tricks, basically, to do it.
Do you think it might be a let's say a situation between the companies, like a competition, companies who compete on different markets? So let's say, for instance, one company might hire the hacker who's trying to get the data just to get the statistics and stuff like that.
There are, let's say, known cases of companies that do hire hackers to damage others' company reputation or data, and it's kind of worth mentioning that there are different type of threats that can happen to companies, because one of them is like data breach. So for instance, they want to steal data of the other company to get access to their clients, right, or users, and just target them or basically own them, whatever. Another type of thing is to, for instance, disrupt the service. And this is actually very, very known like these days, when not only companies but even governments fight between each other. And this is a type of attack that is called denial of service. So basically, they can hire a group of specialists, hackers, that can intentionally disrupt the service by, for instance, putting some website down, right? Or even making such a noise, like a digital noise, that a computer network that is, working in the other part of the world is becoming unusable. So there are also things, I guess, a bit more harmful, where the attempt is to actually damage the information, right? So it's not only about stealing, it's also about harming in a way that a company may want to say, okay, I want to make sure that the data of the users they have is totally damaged and they cannot operate. And it's very serious. Of course, it's crime. It's a crime. So this is something that has to be very well prepared not to be caught, right? But such things happen, basically.
Okay, Bartosz, we have a lot of details about staying secure on the digital environment, and let's finish this first part because this episode will be a two-part episode. And I really wanted to say thank you for this first part, and I hope to see you on the second part.
Thanks a lot. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Smart City Navigators podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Join the conversation by leaving a comment and sharing your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode, in which we'll do another deep dive into a topic related to innovation, sustainability, and new technologies. See you next time.